Good evening, everybody. That's great. I'm Howard Teach. I'm founding chair of the Bronx Jewish Historical Initiative, which is the sponsor and also the Jewish Hall of Fame. The Bronx Jewish Hall of Fame is a project of the Bronx Jewish Historical Initiative. Now, let me say it from the following point of view so you understand how significant this is. The Bronx in the 40s and 50s had more Jews than Israel. It has a history that's just glorious in terms of the people that were here, the things that were accomplished, not only then, but continue to be. You'll recognize that out of tonight. This is the 4th annual Jewish Hall of Fame inductions in the Bronx. It'll continue for the next 100 or 200 years. We have that many people that we want to bring in over that period of time. I want you to know, in the freedom of America, in the freedom that we've had in New York, we've never had it as good practically in the history of our people. We shouldn't emphasize and we shouldn't spend our time thinking that it's being done to us. We should be celebrating as we are tonight all that we've been able to accomplish, that we have the privilege that we've had to be in America, a land of freedom, and live the kind of lives that we've lived. And it's important. And it's important that we bring that home, because a lot of people would take it for granted. We don't take much for granted, but this we should know. And it's going to continue this way as long as we continue doing the kinds of things that these select group of people and all the others who are also Hall of Famers on their blocks. We can't bring everybody in, but everybody has created miracles in their lives. They've done things that are astounding. And so here's part of your job. We have a website, www.bronxjewish.org. That's www.bronxjewish.org. It's wonderful. And on it, it has a place. You just push a button. It'll take you to a form, and it wants to hear your stories. Each of you can tell stories about yourselves, your Bronx neighborhoods, things that were there then that aren't there now. In the Bronx particularly, relationships with other communities. In the old days, it might have been the Italians and Irish. Now it's Latino and African American and others. But the Jewish community has been part of what we've done. We've always had wonderful relationships with other people. It's important that we portray that, particularly now. So you're here, you're going to enjoy the evening, but we're not letting you off the hook.
The reason why this is so important, and Howard touched on the history of the Bronx. We've been joined here by our former city councilwoman, June Iceland, who's with us here. Thank you for your service, June, and your friendship. There's no secret that in the 70s, 80s, and the early 90s, the Bronx took a dive. And if you ask me, while life isn't perfect, we have really been able to turn the ship around, and we're doing better than we have been in a very long time. You cannot build or rebuild unless you have a solid foundation. So when you look at the Bronx and where we are today and where we're headed, the reason why, even though we've had hard, challenging times several decades back, is because we've had a solid foundation with several communities. And the Jewish community, you have laid a solid foundation so that we could be where we are today. If you look at the Bronx today, please understand that in the last 9 years alone, 9.5 years alone, we've seen over 84 million square feet of economic development, 16.5 billion private dollars invested in our borough. We have 40,000 plus units of housing. We have tourism up 14%. Last year, 2017, was the safest year as it relates to crime since 1951. we've cut unemployment from 14.1% to 5.5%. 117,000 more Bronxites are working today than the first day that I took office. And that could not have happened unless you had a community who 40, 50, 60 years ago were here, were building. You look at teachers, how many teachers in my life, in the public school system, are Jewish, doctors, entrepreneurs, landlords, property owners. That's the solid foundation that has allowed for us to be able to weather the storm of the 70s, 80s, and the early 90s. And again, while life isn't perfect, to be able to move on and see the progress that we've been witnessing as of late, the Renaissance, and the fact that the best is yet to come. So when Howard and Peter, working with Jeff Laufer, when they came to me and they wanted to start this initiative, this is a no-brainer, ladies and gentlemen. It's a no-brainer because it allows for us to say thank you to the Jewish community from the Bronx who've laid down that foundation. It allows us to pause and recognize individuals who have done big things with their lives, with your lives, and no matter where it has taken you, you've been unabashful about saying you're from the Bronx. You know, it's important for us to get together, to come together during good times, so that when you have trying times, we all have friends and shoulders to lean on. It is the same way that when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, and I'm of Puerto Rican descent, my parents are Puerto Rican, the Jewish community stepped up big time for the people of the island of Puerto Rico. My family members, many family members of Puerto Ricans from the Bronx. And so it's always good to celebrate. It's always good to have a good time. It's always good to meet with each other and solidify those relationships. When I went to Israel my second time, sitting there with the President Rivlin was amazing, and that enabled for him the following week to reshuffle his schedule when he was giving a speech here at the United Nations to come and visit us right here in the Bronx. And so thank you all for coming out. Enjoy. We got some fascinating inductees here. Congratulations, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of your stories. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. This is really exciting. I'm so happy to be your MC this evening. As Howard mentioned, I work at News 12 The Bronx, moved here from Israel with my husband 6 months ago, but actually my love affair with the Bronx started a few years earlier. And it started because one of my favorite people in this world, my grandmother, who passed away 2 years ago, lived in Riverdale. She was at the Hebrew home. And I would come here in the summers when I was a student and stay in the Lower East Side where my uncle has an apartment. And I would take the one train, the subway, up all the way to the Bronx, transfer to the bus. And I remember thinking how beautiful it is and how green it is, and the river. And these are kind of scenes that we're not used to in Tel Aviv. We have the sea though, which, you know, can't complain. But I would come and visit my grandmother, and my only regret is that I didn't move here sooner because I would have had a lot more time to spend with her. I'm sure she would have loved to be here with all of you today, and I think she is in spirit. So that's to Grandma Shirley. So that's my personal Bronx tale, and I'm so excited to get to know the Bronx better and better. I'm learning about all these new initiatives between the Jewish community and the Bronx. Just last week, I took part in a challah bake at the Israeli consulate where all of the challahs were donated to pots here in the Bronx, part of the solution. So that's amazing. And if I can make one suggestion this evening, it would be, and maybe this already exists, to partner up the Bronx with one of the Israeli cities and to start a real partnership that can grow from there. So you'll have many more reasons to go back. Welcome, everyone. So this evening, we actually have a special edition. It's the centennial commemoration of World War I, which will continue through June 2019. And tonight, we're recognizing the sole Jewish World War I Medal of Honor recipient, Sergeant William Shemin. And I would like to ask his daughter, Ina Shemin Bass, to join Howard and the BP, Ruben Diaz Jr., here at the table for a short chat. Let's welcome them.
My memories are so wonderful of what I used to think of as a wilderness. My dad, and you will hear a little about him, was a most unique man. He was really a pioneer, and he built greenhouses and nursery on 5 acres in the Bronx off the Boston Post Road. It would now be probably part of Co-op City or the Thruway, Connor Street, but the life that I lived was unique. I went to a 4-room schoolhouse. It was Bronx PS 84, and I can remember the 4 rooms that were there. I can remember my teachers, and it was a very fine education then, even then. So I'm so happy to hear the wonderful things that I hear now. I have loved the Bronx all my life.
So this is a special section. Why are we doing it? This is the World War I centennial year. As it started actually a couple of years ago, there's a national celebration. This segment is most significant because her father, Sergeant William Shemin, became a Medal of Honor winner for his service, and you'll hear about his bravery, heroism, courage in World War I. Tell us about how he became a Medal of Honor winner and the importance to your family.
First of all, my grandparents suffered the pogroms of Russia, came over here, and my dad was born in Bayonne, New Jersey. He loved this country with all his heart, and I think pushing everything, the reason he enlisted, and he was way too young to enlist. In World War I, you were to be 21, but he forged his parents' name. He was a kid of 18. But I think the motivation was he was so happy that his parents were safe in a country where they could prosper.
And he went over and he was on the front lines. And
he was sent out to France very quickly. Remember, Europe had been fighting since 1914. They were absolutely flat out. And they were losing the war and waiting for the Americans. So the Americans did not have great training. They were sent over rather quickly, and my dad was on the front lines very quickly. And in the little town of Bezos off the Velle River, and by the way, I was there in August to see this for myself. Very little has changed. The battlefields are just agriculture now. His platoon came under very heavy fire day after day. It was an endurance. And when his officers were killed, he was first sergeant. He took over his platoon. After 3 days of a terrible killing field, he rallied his men together and said, either we're all going to be killed or follow me. I will get us out of here to the best of my ability. He was a born leader. He went, by the way, from private to sergeant in months. Before this feat, however, 3 of his dearest friends, they had been sent out as scouts, and each one was wounded and lay out in this field. He brought each one back to safety. And then he rallied the platoon to try to get out. They got as far out as they could, and then he himself was wounded. He was found the next day, and he spent 3.5 months at a French field hospital. He was discharged. He refused the discharge, and this man, this kid, just said, I have to go back to my unit, and went on to fight many other battles. I went to every one of those battlefields with about 10 of my cousins, children, members of our family.
Talk to us a little bit about after he served and you made the Bronx your home. What was he like? What was
he loved him. He was a forester. When he got out of the service finally, just wounded warriors received a college education, and he wanted to finish. He went to Syracuse University. He was at the forestry school there. And after that, he said, what I really want to do is grow trees, flowers. And so he found this place in the Bronx.
God's country, the Bronx.
It was.
Yes.
It was. It was really like the last parcel of land there.
And one of the things that took place right after the war, in terms of his heroism, is that he was up for a medal. He got several medals.
For my dad's heroism, he received the Distinguished Service Cross. That's nothing to sneeze at, believe me. It's a wonderful medal. It is the second highest medal one receives under the kind of battle that my dad participated in. And actually, his commanding officer, one that was not killed but was in another area, recommended him for the Medal of Honor. He knew that this citation that I'm going to read to you was worthy of a Medal of Honor. It was passed over by other officers, and a comment that was, no Jew is going to get the Medal of Honor here. 100 years later, my sister, who lives in St. Louis, much like my father, a driven woman, we all knew it was wrong. I mean, we all grew up knowing this man should have had the Medal of Honor, but he would never do anything about it. He couldn't find fault with this country. When he died, my sister and my brother and myself, we talked about, and she was the driving force. She spent the last 15 years, president after president. Finally, Obama. And after many committees and Congress and you name it, it happened. But she hung on because we all knew we were right. And he presented our family. 66 members were vetted out to the White House, 2015. And we were treated like royalty, believe me. 3 days.
You have that citation there?
And I do have the citation as presented by President Obama. I would just like, I would like to read it.
Sure.
So this is a presidential citation that you receive. Only the president can award the Medal of Honor, and I will read it for you. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, has awarded in the name of Congress the Medal of Honor to Sergeant William Shemin, United States Army. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty, Sergeant William Shemin distinguished himself by extraordinary acts of heroism at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as rifleman with G Company, 2nd Battalion, 47th Infantry Regiment, 4th Division, American Expeditionary Forces, in connection with combat operations against an armed enemy on the Vale River near Bazoches, France, from August 7th to August 9th, 1918. Sergeant Shemin, upon 3 different occasions, left cover, crossed an open space of 150 yards, repeatedly exposing himself to heavy machine gun and rifle fire to rescue wounded. After officers and senior non-commissioned officers have become casualties, Sergeant Shemin took command of the platoon and displayed great initiative under fire until wounded on August 9th. Sergeant Shemin's extraordinary heroism and selflessness above and beyond the call of duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself. With G Company, 47th Infantry, the 4th Division, and the United States Army.
We would be remiss, and I know that you would feel the same way. At the same time that he received this award, Sergeant Johnson received the award, and it's important that you recognize, at the same time in 1917, he couldn't get the award. Sergeant Johnson, who was African American.
Obama also presented posthumously to Sergeant Henry Johnson that medal.
Thank you.
And we're honored for you being here with your family in recognition of your father, in recognition of all those who served our country 100 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you.
So 4 years ago, the Bronx Jewish Historical Initiative decided to celebrate and form the Bronx Jewish Hall of Fame. Tonight, the people who are right here with us will be inducted. This is the class of 2018. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome Michael Spearman, and he'll be with Peter Shafran, joining him at the table for a quick discussion. Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you very much for including me in this distinguished group of people this evening, and thank you very much for including me in the distinguished group of people who are our predecessors for the last 3 years.
So Michael, let me ask you, first of all, where in the Bronx are you from originally?
I'm originally from the Grand Concourse at Jerome Avenue near Bedford Park Boulevard, where I was brought home from the hospital and where I have resided ever since. So when Lehman College, where we do our performances, came to the Bronx, musicians who did not know of this would congratulate me for moving so close to Lehman College. And I told them that they had it backwards. Lehman College moved into my neighborhood.
So Michael, tell us about the origin and your decision to start an opera in the Bronx.
When I came back from graduate school at Brandeis University, there was really no music of this kind in the borough. And we started the opera company on 24 November of 1967 at Vladek Hall in the Amalgamated Housing Project, a place where we still rehearse. And I dare say we had no idea that we would last for 50 minutes, much less 52 years. The idea was that this borough, my home for life and that I love, was being, to a large degree, almost chastised by people outside of the borough. They did it sometimes by comedy. Ogden Nash, who said, "The Bronx, no thugs," and things like that. I realized that in a very, very small way, what the Bronx needed, and again I say in a very small way because all of these folks and so many others, and Ruben and everyone are working in the same area, what the Bronx needed was others to perceive that we had a huge quality of life here. And in order to do that, all kinds of ventures had to occur. Those ventures included the Orchestra of the Bronx, which I conduct to this day, and the Bronx Opera, which I conduct to this day. What that means is that when we go around, if I had a nickel for every time someone came up to me and said, I didn't know the Bronx was going to be like this, I would be a much richer man than I am today, except I am a millionaire today, except you can't find it in my bank account. What you can find it in is the immense satisfaction and pride that I have to be a part of this borough, to be a part of this community, and to, in a small way, represent the quality of life in this community.
So Michael, in recognition of the wonderful work that you've done for the Bronx and for the Bronx Jewish community, the Bronx Jewish Historical Initiative awards you the Bronx Jewish Hall of Fame, class of 2018.
Thank you very much. All I could say is I am both humbled and proud to accept this.
I know Rabbi very well and was fortunate enough to welcome him to the Bronx. We go back to his first days, and I never asked him this question before. There were lots of other places that did not have Chabads that you could have chosen. Why the Bronx?
Very good question. So it was about 27 years ago, and a few people mentioned to me that there's no Chabad in Riverdale, there's no Chabad in the Bronx. And I wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory. And I wrote him about the community, and the Rebbe gave me and my wife, my dear wife Sarah, a wonderful, wonderful blessing to come here to Riverdale and the Bronx and to reach out and to be a home for Jewish people all over the borough and to bring Yiddishkeit, Jewish education, Jewish programs, learning, mommy programs for Mommy and Me, and many other programs. So the Rebbe gave us the bracha. We did look into many other places, but I guess it was meant for us to be here. And it just so happens my wife Sarah grew up in Pelham Parkway for many years.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Sora because I was going to They Are a Team. And I know of Sora's work in both teaching and certainly with young moms in the community. And
she's doing a lot more. She should be up here more than I should be up here.
I won't argue.
Okay, good.
There's a very exciting thing happening in the South Bronx. Not sure a lot of people know about it, but there's a new colony of Jewish families and Jewish people that are moving into the same area. And of course, this did not elude Rabbi Shemtov. Tell us about it.
So I mentioned to somebody that my wife and I run the Chabad of Riverdale, but before we came to run the Chabad of Riverdale, we were told that we're responsible for any Jew anywhere in the borough that needs anything physically, materially, spiritually, emotionally. We have to be there for them. And many a time, I've been getting calls different times, day and night, running out to people in all kinds of places that are quite scary. And we had the responsibility of, about 13 years ago, we set up a Chabad center in Einstein, where all the students have a Chabad center, home away from home. And just 2 months ago, we had a full-time Chabad rabbi. We have a full-time Chabad rabbi and his wife and family moved to open a Chabad center in South Bronx. And this is on 138th Street and the Willis Avenue Bridge. They had services for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, and Simchas Torah, they're planning Hanukkah. And there's a lot of new families, young couples, singles who've moved in, and they are now experiencing Judaism, Yiddishkeit, in this Chabad Center, South Bronx.
It's extraordinarily exciting. It really is. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I have
you.
the pleasure the pleasure of giving you this beautiful, beautiful, I guess it's a statue, I would call it. It's very unusual, this Hall of Fame presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to tell a real quick story.
Go ahead.
Okay. So people ask, what's the derivation of your name? Because my last name is spelled G-E-T-O. And it's a great story. My great-grandmother, Fanny, came to the United States as a 17-year-old girl, 5 feet tall, weighed 85 pounds in steerage in the 1870s. And my paternal grandfather came here escaping pogroms and impressment into the Tsar's army at the very turn of the century, the last century before this one, before this turn, and he was an illiterate peasant, and he got off the boat at Ellis Island, and he was going through the process, and the immigration clerk, almost all of whom were Irish, because those jobs were controlled by Tammany Hall, which was an Irish-dominated Democratic political machine at that time. And the immigration clerk said to him, and what's your name? And he said, Zhitomirsky, Alyosha Zhitomirsky, Z-H-I-T-O-M-I-R-S-K-Y. And the immigration clerk said, that'll never do in America. I'm going to give you an American name, a good American name, which of course was the experience of millions and millions of Jews and Eastern Europeans and Russians and so on. So he, instead of cutting off the name and putting down the first few letters, Z-H-I-T-O, Zhito, he wrote down on a piece of paper what he understood from my grandfather and wrote down G-E-T-O. And my grandfather was thrilled that he got an American name. And when I was going to enter college, in 1961, I graduated DeWitt Clinton High School, and I was about to enter Columbia College, and my dad came to me, and he said, Ethan, you ought to change your name. He said, ghetto. He said, you know, it's got connotations, and it's this and that. And by the way, I just want to tell you, my father was a real civil rights pioneer. That's a whole other story. So it wasn't a racist thing on his part, but he thought for me, either it sounded Jewish or it sounded like G-H-E-T-T-O. And he said, no one knows you now. This is the time to change your name. I said, no one knows me. Steve and Danny and Bobby and everybody knew me. But I said, Dad, I'll tell you what. Ghetto is our Ellis Island immigrant legacy name. And if I were ever to change my name, and I meant it then, and I still mean it today, I changed it to Zhitomirsky. He said, forget it, forget it, forget it.
That doesn't count to our 5 minutes.
Okay.
No,
sorry.
Very quickly, lightning round.
Yes, sir.
Where in the Bronx did you grow up?
I grew up in 2 neighborhoods. I was born on the Grand Concourse, raised at Royal Hospital, raised at 940 Grand Concourse, just 2 blocks down from when I was born in 1943 to 1956. Then my family's fortunes took a tumble, and we moved to Grand Avenue and 183rd Street. And that thing was an awful neighborhood, but it wasn't ritzy like the Concourse. And later, I lived in Riverdale when I came back from college for a period of time.
So today you are a political consultant. But before you get to all of that, explain to some of the folks here who are some of the people that we've read about in history that you work for, what campaigns you worked on throughout the years. How long you been involved in politics and who you've worked for?
I started professionally managing political campaigns in the Bronx as a teenager. I worked on the staffs and on the campaigns and staffs of 2 Bronx great congressmen who were great progressive reform Democrats of that era, Jonathan Bingham and Jim Scheuer. I worked in the 1968 campaign for president for Bobby Kennedy, and I was on that staff. I worked for Herman Badillo when he ran for borough president.
Not Badillo?
No, that's right. I told Ruben this great story, which I can tell you in 15 seconds. When Herman Badillo, who was Puerto Rican, ran for borough president.
What year was this?
In 1969.
Think about that. A Puerto Rican running for borough president.
65.
In
65.
Yes, I was going to say 65.
Yes. 1965. And Herman ran successfully that year, but there was a larger Italian population than there is today in the Bronx. Not that we don't have a terrific Italian community. So, and he was concerned that people wouldn't vote for Latinos, so he got all these boxes of Brillo scour pads, and he put labels on them that said, Brillo from Badillo is how he hoped people would pronounce it, so they wouldn't think he was Puerto Rican. They might think he was Italian. And then I went to work for a marvelous guy named Robert Abrams. He was a 3-term borough president of the Bronx, all during the 1970s. I was his press secretary, chief of staff, campaign manager, and went on to run his campaign and then be his chief of staff when he got elected state attorney general. It goes on and on. Oh, and Howard Dean, I was his campaign manager in New York State in 2003, 2004, being the only presidential candidate against the war in Iraq, the only one of the Democratic candidates against the war.
What advice would you give the young elected officials that are coming when you see all of this new leadership in New York City and beyond? What advice would you give them?
First of all, be authentic, true to yourself. That's absolutely critical. You have to make decisions sometimes that are unpopular, and hopefully if you make the right decisions, even though some are unpopular, overall people will see your value in representing them.
And in all seriousness, it matters who's in office. Strong politics makes for stronger policy. And we often read about the candidates, and we don't often read about those individuals who are behind the scene making sure that we have the right people in office. And Ethan Ghetto, this Bronx boy, who is a friend of mine, who has done fascinating things and has helped fascinating individuals, won some, lose some, but has always, always done it. You've always done it because you understood that it matters who's in office. And for that, today we induct you to the Bronx Jewish Hall of Fame. Congratulations. Congratulations.
You, in terms of your career, and we go back a long way when I was a law secretary, and you were in the court at the same time. And what you've done has been nothing short of amazing. The first woman in the appellate division, presiding judge of the appellate division, so many organizations that you've started and you've spearheaded. And so much has to do with values, because that's what a judge brings to our society. And I know you said to me before how Judaism and your Jewishness was an important part of that. Tell us a little about that.
Extremely so. First, I should say, I grew up in Connecticut, in a small town in Connecticut, where being Jewish made you very different. You had to answer for it. The term dirty Jew was not unknown to me. You know, I was the smartest kid in the class, but that didn't stop a teacher from asking me, why did you take off for that Jewish holiday? Did your father stop working? Well, I was a pretty brash kid, and I said, no, but they had off on Good Friday, and their fathers had to work. I mean, I never hid what I was. I was always very proud of being Jewish, and part of that was because of my family. I knew 3 of my grandparents until I was in my 20s, and they were remarkable. The most compassionate, loving, giving, kind people. That was the atmosphere that they generated within the family. And I must say, I moved to back to the Bronx when I was 14 in my sophomore year of high school. And that was a liberating experience, because being Jewish became unimportant in the sense of making me different. Being among 95% of, Jewish students made me just feel, hey, I'm a human being with abilities and what have you, and I could strive for anything I wanted. We were pretty low on the economic scale, but in our home, education was revered. And I took that very seriously. I knew from the time I was in 2nd grade, I was going to go to college. And when I was 12, I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to be a labor lawyer. I was going to save the working classes, because my father had already indoctrinated me in that area. And I just kept at it. Nothing deterred me. My mother wasn't so happy about that. She was sure I wouldn't get married. However, I stepped up to the plate, have 3 wonderful children, and had a wonderful husband. But the point is, the Bronx had an atmosphere that said to me, hey, I can do anything. I can be anything. And I will say The Jewish values did, however, have a great impact on me in terms of the kind of judge I became. Listen, I used to visit my grandparents on the weekend when I was home from school. And there was always some poor person, I mean, not that they had any money, but there was always a poor person on Saturday for dinner because he didn't have a place to go or he didn't have enough to eat. On Sunday, my grandfather would have the envelopes from all of the charities, and I would sit with him. If he never heard of them, he'd send them $1. Maybe he heard of them $2, then the 5s and the 10s. That's where his money went. And let me tell you, that cost me a lot of money, because after that, for years, when I could never reject an envelope until I was 50 years old, and I realized, hey, they sell these names. I mean, I'm still in that mode. But these were the most compassionate, kind people.
And one of the things that all of us knew over the years is you went to Betty when you had a question, when you needed something, and particularly in terms of women's organizations and the court. The difference you made over the years is kind of extraordinary. So I ask you this question.
Thank you, Howard.
Ambition obviously was part of what you grew up with. And when you were there, you just didn't sit and say, okay, it's the end of the day, I'm going home. You took a look and said, I got to do this, I got to do this, there's a future, I got to set it up for the future, and so forth. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, it's true. I always felt that, one, it wasn't enough that I was going to make it or I had made it. I wanted to bring others with me. And that, I would say, was one of my strengths outside of the bench. Working in women's groups, or as one of the judges who you know well, he was the chief judge, said she even helped men along the way. But I did. I mean, doing it alone, and particularly in the women's area, doesn't mean anything. If we're not all together, if we're not strong as a group, we're not going to accomplish and succeed on behalf of not only women, but society. Women, all of this Me Too business is so damaging because it has stopped so many women from contributing to society, to the betterment of society. And it's something that I have always felt we must fight, we must continue to fight, and that's a voice I give to all of you in the audience, and I see a couple in the front row who I know who also fight that fight, and I want to thank you, and on this side too. We are going to overcome. We're going to make it a better world for our children and for our grandchildren, and only we can do that. I say that candidly.
Just one last thing that really strikes me. One of the things that you do is this Judicial Ethics Commission that you're the vice chair of.
Correct.
I'd like to sort of end on that, because one of the reasons that we looked at you for the Hall of Fame, not only in terms of what you accomplished, but is the ethical values that you've had over the years, which we're so proud of, that we know you and that you were part of it. What does that mean to be on a commission like that and looking in terms of the lawyers and others of the future?
Well, actually, we're a commission to which judges send questions. Can we do this? Is this ethical? Is this proper? And I must tell you, we're pretty tough. Much tougher, perhaps, than the rules require. But I feel that being a judge is such a responsibility as well as being an honor. You owe it to those whom you serve to do it at the highest ethical level. And in that regard, I must say, my religious background, I was not particularly observant, but I think that the ethical values in Judaism are really overriding. They do help me on that commission in terms of reaching the right results. I will say this, sometimes I'm tougher than some of my colleagues, but that's okay. I usually can talk them around to it.
Well, I think you can all understand why we're so thrilled that you're now part of the Bronx Jewish Hall of Fame. Thank you, Eddie.
And I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Charlie was a professor He taught Chaucer, and he's published over 30 books. The last one, and several about basketball, but the last one called The Chosen Game, The History of Jews in Basketball, published just a year ago. So
does this mean I'm an adult officially?
Maybe.
It's worth coming here for.
As the doctor said to Portnoy, maybe we've begun.
I was brought up on Fulton Avenue between 174th and 175th, across the street from Cortona Park. We played all the games, punch ball, stick ball, kick the can. Because we lived across the street from the park, we also played tie the little kid to a tree and leave him there.
I got tied sometimes.
You got tied sometimes? We also did some other stuff. And I went to PS4. I was born in Bronx Hospital. Went to PS4, Junior High School 44, and Roosevelt High School. Rough Riders. Rough Riders still writing. Well, yeah, I started writing, wow, I don't even remember. I've had 24 books published. 25th is coming out in June. I've written mostly, I call them existential sports novels. I've written a couple of baseball books. I wrote a novel about the Communist Party in America from the 20s to 1950. I've written thousands of pieces online and all kinds of stuff like that. And I live about 100 miles north with my wife and my 2 dogs. And I'm kind of isolated, which I love. I sit and write and trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up.
Very good. I'm proud to be able to present you this symbol of your being a member of the Bronx Jewish Hall of Fame.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank Howard and everybody here, and to be in the company of such highly successful people is definitely an honor. And thank you so much.
So executive privileges again. Before we get Renee Wexler Taylor Bologna, who's our final inductee, who will be interviewed by Michelle, we've been joined by a historic figure here in the Bronx, someone that we're extremely proud of. She is the first female, the first African-American female elected to District Attorney of the Bronx in the entire history of the state of New York, our District Attorney, Darcel Clark. I want her to come up and say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Borough President. This is a wonderful occasion. I know this is the 4th year, and every year I try to get here, and there's always some kind of crisis going on. You know, that happens in the Bronx for some reason. But this year I was going to make it my business to come, and I want to congratulate all the honorees, but I have to tell you, there's one in particular that I'm really here for, and that's the Honorable Betty Weinberg Ellerin. I love you, Betty. I would not be the first woman to be the District Attorney of the Bronx, and I would not be the first woman of color, African-American woman, to be elected DA in the entire state of New York if it weren't for role models like Betty Ellerin. I see Judge Anita Florio here too. These women really made the difference in my life, knowing that I wanted to be a lawyer, I wanted to be a judge. And, you know, Betty just paved the way for so many of us. And it's important to recognize people now, you know, in the real time, so that she knows that we love her. And I'm so proud that she was from the Bronx, too. So thank you. And congratulations to all the other honorees. Thank you so much.
Our last, but definitely not least, inductee of the evening. So the full name is Renee Wexler Taylor Bologna. You've collaborated on 22 plays, 4 films, 9 movies and series, and it seems like you haven't stopped and you're not planning to anytime soon.
No, I'm just getting my second wind.
All right, well, we'll be following. So I read in your bio that your debut was at 15 when you attended a Purim pageant at Madison Square Garden.
And I got $5 to dance across the stage as a slave girl.
How appropriate. I'm guessing you were living in the Bronx still at that time. Tell
No,
us
I wasn't.
You were not.
I went to PS 105 in the Bronx, Pelham Parkway, and all of my family lived on Lydic Avenue, Barnes Avenue, Kruger Avenue. And we were all proud to be Bronxites. And we thought Pelham Parkway was the east side.
So tell us a little bit about the Bronx that you grew up in.
It was wonderful. It was the whole neighborhood was Jewish. And we lived with my grandfather and my mother. My mother would cry if she was here today. She'd be so proud that I was with all these remarkable people. It's an honor to be here.
Very well deserved.
And I just was always going to be an actress. I was going to be a writer. I didn't know if I could. I didn't know, but I knew that I wanted to and that I would try. And I always say, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? They'll throw me out. And I always say, when I've been thrown out of better places, so.
And who hasn't been thrown out, right?
Yes.
So you've really graced the stage on so many occasions and so many different stages, but you're probably most identified with your role as Fran's mother.
On The Nanny, but I almost didn't get that because, thank you. I almost didn't get that because the network wanted somebody to play the Jewish mother who was more Presbyterian. And all of the women who were up for the part were not Jewish. They were Irish. They were, well-known actresses. And Fran said, here's what we're going to do, because she wanted me to be her mother, because she saw me in a movie that my husband and I did, Made for Each Other, and she said, I want you to play my mother, but they want somebody not Jewish.
Which makes no sense whatsoever.
For what reason, I don't know. So she said, you'll be on as a guest, and we'll write a small part, and we'll have somebody say, hey, why can't she play the mother? And that's just what happened.
And you ended up co-starring.
Yeah. So
that was such a fun series to watch.
Thank you.
I don't know one person my age who hasn't watched it and cracked up all along.
Thank you.
What was it like working on that set? Did you have as much fun as it looked like?
I did. I had a wonderful time. They used to tell me to go home. They said, you don't have to hang around anymore. And I said, no, I like to watch the other scenes. I'm having a wonderful time. And the costume designer, when I first met her, Brenda Cooper, said to me, meet me in this department store and I'm going to show you what you're going to wear. And I said, don't be ridiculous. Who would wear that? And she said, you. And she said, and you'll wear a girdle. I said, I never wore a girdle in my life. And she said, well, you should wear a girdle because when you wear a girdle, you walk a certain way. And when you wear heels, you walk a certain way. And when you wear false lashes, you use your eyes a certain way. And when you have nails, you use your hands a certain way. And when you have a lot of fake jewelry, you use your hands
It's very heavy, very heavy.
So that's how my character was created from the outside in.
Is the cast still in touch? When's the last time you met with people from the cast?
Oh, I see Fran all the time. I went to the opening of King Kong with her, and she said, don't laugh during the whole show.
And let me guess.
She said, they're serious.
And were you able to comply?
Was I what?
Able to keep your laughter?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh.
No, even when I was nominated for an Emmy and I didn't win, I said, "Oh no," and she punched me. She said, "You're supposed to smile." I said, "I didn't know. I thought you just react naturally." "Oh no, it's not me."
You're just too natural, too natural. So give me a highlight, a moment that you'd like to share, one of your career highlights from all of the years.
Oh, well, I have to tell a story about being on
Go ahead.
with Elizabeth Taylor. In that, that was the show I was nominated for an Emmy for. I was so thrilled in real life to meet her that I bowed when I met her. And they said, "Oh, put that in." And that's what I did when she said, "This is Elizabeth Taylor," I bowed. And I backed out of the room, like when you meet the Queen.
Never turn your face, right? You bowed, walking backwards?
Right. You never turn your face on the Queen.
All right, so we're all curious to know what's next. What are you working on? I know you had a one-woman show.
My Life on a Diet. It's going to play around the country for a couple of years, maybe longer. I was on Jewish television, and there was a young man who was the anchor, and he said, "You know, she's in her 80s." And I said, "No, I'm not. You must have the wrong person." And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He said, "Let me look at my notes. I'm so sorry." And I said, "No, it's true. I'm just in denial." Next, I'm going to be doing a play about Mae West, and it's called Mae West, A True Hollywood Story, Maybe. You know, she was 89 when she played in Vegas, so I have plenty of time.
All right, well, don't wait too long. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And here I would like to honor you
in
the Hall of Fame.
Great honor. This is a great honor.
Congratulations, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. And I love Israel. I've been there twice with my son, and we loved it.
We could talk about this all night.
Yes, we could.